The wind arrived just before sunset, screaming down the mountain slopes like a living thing. Elias Turner stood outside his cabin, stacking the last of the firewood beside the porch. At 42, the mountain man had spent most of his life alone in these rugged peaks. The mountains demanded strength, patience, and respect. They gave nothing freely and punished carelessness without mercy. He glanced toward the darkening sky. Heavy clouds rolled across the horizon, swallowing the last traces of blue. Snowflakes had already begun drifting through the air. "A bad one," he muttered. The old shepherd dog lying near the steps lifted its head and whined softly. Elias nodded. "Yeah, Duke. I know." He worked faster. Every winter brought storms, but something about this one felt different. The air itself seemed tense. By the time darkness settled over the valley, snow was falling heavily. Elias secured the barn door and hurried inside. The cabin was small but sturdy. Thick pine logs formed the walls. A stone fireplace dominated one side of the room. Shelves lined the walls, packed with supplies he had carefully stored through autumn. He had just settled into his chair when Duke suddenly barked. Once. Then again. Elias frowned. Nobody traveled these mountains during a storm. Especially not at night. Duke rushed toward the door. The barking became frantic. Elias grabbed his lantern and stepped outside. The wind struck him immediately. Snow whipped across his face. For several moments he saw nothing. Then a faint shape emerged from the darkness. A person. Stumbling. Falling. Getting up again. Elias rushed forward. The figure collapsed just a few yards from the cabin. When he reached her, he discovered it was a woman. Young. Maybe 30. Snow covered her coat and hair. Her lips had turned blue. She was barely conscious. "Help," she whispered. Then her eyes closed. Without hesitation, Elias lifted her into his arms and carried her inside. The warmth of the cabin hit them both. He laid her near the fire and quickly wrapped blankets around her. After several minutes, her trembling eased slightly. She opened her eyes. Fear flashed across her face. Then confusion. "Where am I?" "My cabin," Elias said. "You found me? You nearly froze to death." The woman swallowed. "Thank you." Her voice cracked. Elias handed her a cup of warm broth. She drank carefully. For several minutes neither spoke. Finally she said, "My name is Clara." "Elias." Her gaze wandered around the room. Then toward the storm rattling the windows. "I was trying to reach Willow Creek." Elias almost laughed. "In this weather? I didn't know the storm would hit so fast." Nobody did. She stared into the fire. Sadness settled over her features. Not ordinary sadness. The kind that came from carrying pain for a very long time. Elias recognized it. He carried some of his own. "You can stay tonight," he said. Relief flooded her eyes. "Just until morning." Of course. Neither of them knew morning would change everything. Throughout the night, the storm grew worse. The cabin groaned under powerful gusts. Snow piled against doors and windows. When dawn arrived, the world had disappeared beneath white mountains of drifting snow. Elias opened the door and immediately closed it again. The snow stood nearly chest-high. The wind remained fierce. "No travel today," he announced. Clara approached carefully. "How bad is it?" "Worse than I've seen in years." Her shoulders slumped. One day became 3. 3 became 5. The storm refused to leave. Each morning brought more snow. Each night brought stronger winds. The mountain trails vanished completely. Entire forests disappeared beneath white blankets. They were trapped. At first Clara apologized constantly. "I don't want to be a burden." "You're not. I'll leave as soon as I can." "You'll leave when it's safe." Gradually the tension faded. They settled into a routine. Elias gathered wood from covered storage areas. Clara cooked meals. Together they fed the chickens and cared for the animals sheltered in the barn. The cabin no longer felt quite so lonely. And that unsettled Elias more than he expected. For 15 years he had lived alone. After losing his wife during a fever epidemic, he had withdrawn from the world. The mountains became his refuge. People eventually stopped visiting. That was how he preferred it. Or so he had believed. One evening Clara sat near the fire mending a torn glove. The flames painted golden light across her face. "You've lived here alone all this time?" she asked. "Mostly. Doesn't it get lonely?" Elias poked at the fire. "Sometimes." She smiled sadly. "I know that feeling." He looked up. For a moment their eyes met. There was understanding there. Real understanding. The kind that required no explanations. Days later, Clara finally told him why she had been traveling alone. "My husband died last spring." Elias remained silent. She continued. "We lost our son 2 years before that." The words emerged quietly. Almost mechanically. As though she'd repeated them too many times. The grief destroyed him. Her eyes glistened. "And eventually it nearly destroyed me." The room fell silent except for the crackling fire. "I'm sorry," Elias said. She nodded. "After he died, I couldn't stay there anymore." "Willow Creek?" "My sister lives there." "So you were starting over?" "Trying to." Elias understood. Starting over sounded simple. In reality it was one of the hardest things a person could do. Outside, the blizzard raged on. Inside, 2 wounded souls sat before the fire. Neither realized how much the other needed saving. One night, nearly 2 weeks after Clara's arrival, a terrifying crack echoed through the valley. The entire cabin shook. Duke barked wildly. Elias jumped to his feet. What was that? Another thunderous boom followed. His expression darkened immediately. Avalanche. Clara's eyes widened. Nearby? Very. Elias grabbed his coat and lantern. "I need to check the barn." "I'm coming." "No. I'm coming." Before he could argue further, she was already pulling on her boots. Together they stepped into the storm. Snow lashed their faces. Visibility was almost non-existent. Then Elias saw it. Part of the hillside above the barn had collapsed. A massive wall of snow had crashed downward. The barn still stood. But barely. And as the wind howled around them, Elias realized the danger was far from over. The mountain itself was moving, and if they didn't act quickly, everything he had spent years building could vanish before sunrise. The sight of the damaged hillside sent a chill through Elias that had nothing to do with the cold. Snow and broken trees covered part of the slope above the barn. The avalanche had stopped only a short distance away. For now. The mountain groaned again. A deep, unsettling sound echoed through the darkness. Clara heard it too. Her face turned pale. Is it going to happen again? Elias tightened his grip on the lantern. I don't know. The answer frightened him more than he wanted to admit. The mountains were unpredictable. Years of experience had taught him that nature followed no rules except its own. Another avalanche could bury the barn. Or the cabin. Or both. Let's move, he said. Together they fought their way toward the barn. The wind nearly knocked Clara off her feet twice. Each time Elias caught her arm before she fell. By the time they reached the building, both were exhausted. Inside, the animals were restless. The horses stamped nervously. The goats huddled together. Even the chickens seemed agitated. Animals sensed danger long before humans did. Elias inspected the structure carefully. One side of the roof had suffered minor damage from falling debris. Nothing catastrophic. Not yet. We need to reinforce this wall, he said. Tonight? Tonight. For the next several hours they worked in brutal conditions. They carried timber. Hammered supports into place. Cleared packed snow away from weak points. The labor was exhausting. Several times Clara insisted she could continue even when Elias could see she was nearing her limit. At dawn they finally returned to the cabin. Both collapsed into chairs near the fire. For several minutes neither spoke. Then Clara started laughing. A tired, genuine laugh. Elias looked at her. What? She shook her head. If someone had told me a month ago I'd be rebuilding a barn during a blizzard at the top of a mountain, I'd have called them insane. To his own surprise, Elias laughed too. The sound felt unfamiliar. He couldn't remember the last time he'd laughed with another person. The realization lingered long after the moment passed. Days continued to drift by. The storm still showed no sign of ending. But something inside the cabin had changed. The awkwardness that once existed between them disappeared completely. Their conversations became easier. Longer. Sometimes they talked for hours. Sometimes they sat in comfortable silence. Neither felt the need to fill every quiet moment. One evening Clara discovered an old wooden box tucked beneath Elias's bed. She wasn't snooping. She had simply been sweeping the floor. The box slid out accidentally. Immediately she noticed his expression change. Pain crossed his face. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't mean." "It's all right." Slowly, Elias knelt beside the box. His hands trembled slightly. Inside were old photographs. A tiny pair of children's boots. Several letters. Clara immediately understood. His family. For a long moment he simply stared at the contents. Then he handed her a photograph. A smiling woman stood beside a young boy. The child looked no older than 7. "That's Sarah," Elias said softly. "And my son, Ben." The love in his voice remained even after all these years. "They're beautiful." He nodded. For several moments neither spoke. Finally Clara asked, "What happened?" Elias looked into the fire. The fever came through the valley. His voice was steady but distant. As fast as a wildfire. Clara listened quietly. Ben got sick first. He swallowed. We thought he'd recover. The silence that followed said everything. Then he continued. Sarah cared for him day and night. His eyes glistened. 3 weeks later I buried them both. The room felt smaller. The fire crackled softly. Outside, the storm howled. Inside, old grief finally had words. I stayed in town another year, Elias said. Then one day I realized every street reminded me of what I'd lost. He stared at the photograph. So I came here. Clara reached across the table. Without speaking, she placed her hand over his. A simple gesture. Nothing more. Yet it carried more comfort than any speech. Elias looked at her. For the first time in 15 years, he felt truly seen. Not pitied. Not judged. Seen. Weeks passed. The blizzard gradually weakened. The fierce wind softened. The snowfall lessened. One morning sunlight finally pierced the clouds. Golden rays spilled across the mountains. Clara stood outside staring at the sky. Tears filled her eyes. I forgot how blue it was. Elias smiled. So did I. For the next several days they worked to clear paths through the snow. It was difficult labor. But with every passing day the world became more accessible. Eventually the trail leading down the mountain emerged. The storm was finally over. The realization should have made Clara happy. Instead it filled her with dread. The same feeling haunted Elias. Neither wanted to say it aloud. One evening they sat beside the fire. The atmosphere felt different. Heavy. Tomorrow Clara could leave. Tomorrow she could continue to Willow Creek. Tomorrow life would return to normal. Neither wanted normal. Finally Clara broke the silence. I suppose I should leave soon. Elias stared into the flames. Probably. The answer hurt more than he expected. Clara lowered her eyes. Thank you for saving my life. You don't owe me thanks. I do. No. He looked at her. You gave me something too. Her heart skipped. What? Elias took a long breath. For years he had hidden behind solitude. Behind grief. Behind fear. Now there was only truth. You reminded me life isn't over. Clara felt tears forming. Elias. I thought my story ended years ago. His voice softened. But then you showed up in a snowstorm. A small laugh escaped her. Mixed with tears. The firelight danced across the room. Outside, stars filled the clear mountain sky. For the first time in weeks there was complete silence. No wind. No snow. Only stillness. Then Clara spoke the words neither had dared say. What happens now? Elias looked at her for a long moment. The answer felt surprisingly simple. You could stay. The room went quiet. Clara's breath caught. I mean, he said carefully, if that's what you want. She stared at him. At the man who had carried her from a blizzard. Who had shared his grief. His hopes. His heart. The man who no longer felt like a stranger. Slowly, she smiled. A real smile. The kind born from healing. The kind born from hope. I think, she whispered, that's exactly what I want. Months later, people in the valley would speak of the legendary storm that trapped a mountain man and a traveler together for weeks. They would talk about the avalanches. The snowdrifts. The record-breaking winter. But none of them would know the most important thing the blizzard left behind. It wasn't destruction. It wasn't hardship. It wasn't survival. It was two lonely hearts that found their way back to life. A storm had brought Clara to the mountain. Love gave her a reason to stay. And for the first time in many years, when Elias looked toward the future, he didn't see endless solitude stretching before him. He saw home. And standing beside him in that home was Clara, smiling beneath the mountain sky that had changed everything.